Here's a funny one. It's like they have this sort of policy now where they say like the speak gently policy, where it's like you do not manage by yelling. I think there's still a lot of people who manage.
It's interesting that they had to put that rule in place.
Yeah.
That there was a lot of yelling before.
Speak gently.
Welcome to the Connected podcast, coming to you from the heart of Taipei, in which we get personal on news and issues that matter here in Taiwan and around the world. I have a very special guest for you today. The mysterious voice behind the channel Asianometry. So mysterious, in fact, that we're not going to show his face to not spoil the surprise when he does finally decide to reveal his face on his channel. John from Asianometry, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's such a privilege.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. And this was a long time coming. I wanted to get you on the podcast for a while. Your channel focuses on two of my favorite things in the whole wide world, which is history and technology. You do historical perspectives on tech, kind of looking to the future of tech. And also touch on sort of business and even sometimes geopolitics, I guess,
yes.
Of mostly Asian countries and businesses.
Right.
And when we talk about countries and businesses in Asia, it's impossible to omit TSMC, which and the Taiwanese semiconductor industry, which has been a big focus of your channel throughout the years. But before we dive into all of that, let me ask you about how you got started doing YouTube and your channel, and kind of your journey as being a content creator here in Taiwan.
Oh, it's like a really interesting sort of story. You know, I worked in Silicon Valley for about 10 years and then kind of burnt out and was depressed. So I decided that, you know, I'm just going to kind of take some time off and I'll go travel and work in Asia for a little bit. So I picked, 4 different cities. It was like Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Ended up putting like applications all, and Taipei gave me the best offer and I headed over there. And then about a year later, my mom was just like, I don't really know what you're doing in Taiwan. I don't really know what's your life over there. And I was like, you know what, Mom, I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna make a YouTube channel.
Because all parents want to see their kids become YouTubers.
Right. Or Mom wanted to see like stuff in Taiwan. So I was like, all right. And then my sister, she did YouTube, but then she gave up. And then she said, here, take this snowball microphone. So I had the computer, I had the microphone. I was like, might as well just get started. And then it was like tourism videos at first. So like I go to the Dashi Statue Park and I'd be like, hey Mom, this is the park and all that. And then, you kind of run out of stuff eventually to go to within like a 1 or 2 day travel. So, I started to do more like history stuff. And at first it was like very Asian, Taiwanese history, Chinese history. And then when the semiconductor shortage hit, it started to become more like technology stuff. I was aware of TSMC before then, but I did 1 or 2 videos about it and no one really cared. The funny thing is that there still is a Minecraft YouTuber named TSMC, and he was way larger than the actual TSMC. So there was one of my top search terms back in those early days was TSMC Minecraft. And he's still here. He's still around. He's still making videos. It's hilarious.
Well, it smells like a lawsuit, honestly. I'm glad they, found a way to live in peace and, TSMC make chips and, he's still making Minecraft videos.
And he has like 2 million subscribers. And the official TSMC YouTube channel has like 7,000. So he's a way bigger YouTuber.
Well, I mean, speaking of big YouTubers, your channel grew exponentially. It was like real time, just sort of the tail end of the pandemic was when I discovered it. You are now coming up on 1 million subscribers. So being here, based in Taiwan, doing YouTube on a pretty large scale already, how is that working out in terms of everyday life?
I think it's kind of like I've been at this for about 8 years now, almost 8 or 9 years. And it's it's definitely a grind, I would say. Like I have a cadence of about 2 videos a week, that's a lot.
You're very prolific.
It's a lot. It's a little too much. It's intense. And especially as the videos have gotten more detailed, a lot more rich, a lot more narratively structured and all that. And I think it's very difficult. It's definitely a sort of obsession to get you to any sort of success on YouTube, because that's how things are. And I think I think living in Taiwan helps me a lot in that, especially in technology, which is kind of ironic because if you do English, a lot of the YouTubers going to be in the US, they're going to be focused on the US and stuff like that. And I felt that there was this hole in terms of Asian coverage of businesses and these very large companies and all these interesting things that were happening. And like people should talk about it. And I think that was kind of like one of the core reasons and core things that I get to have a perspective on. I have a perspective on hardware, semiconductors, the history of like computers and stuff like that. And I think, in the States, it's more like software, AI, stuff like that. Recently, I've been trying to do more of the kind of, see and blend a little bit both. But, it's a very strange position, but you have to get comfortable with that.
Does being here in Taiwan give you any sort of special access to companies? Does it help with what you do?
Absolutely not. They're going to be like, they've never heard of me before. I remember like I would like email TSMC people, and like there would be people in the States who get like more access, or they would get briefings and stuff like that. And like, me being actually in Taiwan, I don't really meet a lot of people there. I've grown a small network, but it's like more kind of just outreach and stuff like that. There is one advantage in that. I think like if something breaks in the United States, you get to see it in the morning, and then you can work on a video about it and then have it out conceivably by the end of that day. And that's kind of like a news thing. That's like a little advantage, but I'm not really a breaking news guy, so.
To me, your videos sound like or look like they are coming from a place of like deep interest. For whatever reason, maybe the historical perspectives, I guess, they make me think back to my relationship with technology when I was growing up and like wanting a computer, finally getting a computer at some point, even learning programming at some point. So I'm curious, what was your relationship with technology when you were growing up?
When I was growing up, I grew up in the 90s. So that's kind of like a kind of interesting time in technology. The internet was coming together. PCs were still had dynamism in that industry a little bit. Mobile phones were starting to emerge at the end of the decade. So I got to see a lot of that. I still have memories of it. I still have memories of video game consoles and all that. So a lot of it does kind of touch deeply into my soul. And I think like a few people have emailed me to say like a lot of your videos tend to start in the 1980s, and I was like, I wonder why. Yeah, that's a great observation. But like I think it's really special because especially when you get to do a video about a technology that you're familiar with, right? I try not to be too nostalgic in the videos because I try to get a little more realistic view, but like it's a very interesting sort of double echo that kind of like I'm working on, and I'm like, I remember I used to have this iPhone 3G or something like that.
I recently saw your video on banded phones from China. So for people who might not have heard of those were like relatively cheap kind of almost DIY phones that companies were putting together based on technology developed by a Taiwanese company, actually. And manufacturers in China were just making them all kinds of weird and adding all kinds of wacky features that you wouldn't see on a phone these days.
Yeah.
And yeah, it kind of reminded me of how ingrained Taiwan is, but also has been throughout history in little like quirky technologies or things that people might not immediately associate with Taiwan, but it was there in the background. For me, the first exposure to that was, an unknowing exposure, was video game consoles, specifically NES knockoffs that were being imported from Taiwan, sold all over Poland. In my elementary school, everyone had what we called Pegasus,
Oh, wow.
which was basically a Family clone made by a Taiwanese Tiancai, Xiao Tiancai, sorry. A company here that was just like knocking them out of the factory and then selling them all over the world. So it goes back to before TSMC, kind of like Taiwan's place and in the tapestry of sort of technology that we might use every day and not even realize it's coming from Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of like a really good point. I think it's like one of that era of like people working with these interesting kind of counterfeit technologies was kind of, I mean, that's really special. And that built a lot of expertise across the whole ecosystem and across the whole population. I think you should not underrate the value of having that, especially when it comes to establishing a semiconductor industry later on.
So what do you think was the, like, based on your knowledge of TSMC history, what was the key factor that made it possible to kickstart a semiconductor industry here in Taiwan?
I think the fascinating thing is that kind of like even before Morris Chang came up with the idea for TSMC, UMC was doing a really good job with the yields. So I think you had indications that, you know, Taiwanese were really good at producing semiconductors at high yield prior to kind of any sort of that company. And I think that's indication of, you know, discipline, indication of cleanliness, indication of working through the recipe and making sure that the recipe is continually being improved. And I think a lot of those cultural aspects ingrain themselves within Taiwan itself, and TSMC itself. That's part of the equation. But you have other parts of the equation moving together where you had, like, you know, Hsinchu Science Park back in those days was mostly computer manufacturers, right? Computer and components manufacturers. And one of the main reasons they wanted to actually do this RCA deal, which brought over the semiconductor technology from the United States to Taiwan, was that they wanted to self-produce chips that would be bought and used by these computer makers. And I think that's kind of like it's an interesting perspective to see that kind of like all of that sort of interplay together came kind of at the right time to produce a company that I think is fairly successful. And I think we should be very clear that TSMC was just like a moderate success up until, I would say, 2009, 2010, 2011. I think especially even through the early 2000s, they were neck and neck with UMC, and like we didn't talk about TSMC. We talked about the Taiwanese semiconductor industry in aggregate, because you had UMC, you had the Vanguard, I think, and like the memory makers and all that. Like it was a very competitive space, and I think as nowadays, I think there's one Goliath that sort of emerged out of that. But like that was a very recent development, as I guess the TSMC people themselves know.
Well, but there is, I think, a tendency here in Taiwan to retcon the history of the semiconductor industry a little bit and just kind of put TSMC front and center and almost enshrine it as the Goliath of the Taiwanese semiconductor industry. But I actually revisited one of your videos on the early TSMC history to prepare for this interview. And one thing that stood out is that Morris Chang was not all that keen or all that, he didn't have a lot of faith in the future of TSMC early on.
Yeah, I think like one of the interesting things is that he did not jump directly to TSMC once he founded it. He started this company, and then he kept working at E-Tree, and he kept doing his other chairmanships. And I think like he handed off the CEO job to Jim Dykes, who was kind of his colleague from Texas Instruments. And Jim Dykes was he was an executive in the U.S. from the United States who came over and worked for about 2 years, and he kind of set up a lot of the things, and then he handed over to another TI executive. Oh gosh, I forgot his name, like Donald's
Brooks.
Brooks, yes. And Don Brooks, I mean, most of these people are long gone; they passed away. But Don Brooks fortunately left us a oral history, and I think like it gives you an indication that he had more faith in TSMC than Morris Chang did. And I think like he kind of really drove that business, helped set it up. And the reason he had so much faith was because he looked at it and he said, these yields are amazing. He stumbled onto kind of like a very special space. And I think that was kind of impacted him because he knew how bad these yields were in the United States as well. So I think coming to Taiwan suddenly seems so well. And he's like, if these yields were so good, eventually we will see success. And they did.
Well, for those among our listeners and viewers who are not familiar with yields in semiconductors, this is how many chips on a wafer are actually usable that don't have flaws.
Right.
And they are connected with something that you bring up a lot in many of your videos, which is cycle times, which is, again, to explain to those who might not have heard that term, this is how quickly a company can go from like a blank wafer to basically a finished wafer. What is the relationship between those cycle times and improving yields?
It's a kind of an operations think kind of thing where you say the faster you can get your cycle time, the lower the cycle time gets down, the faster you can iterate. And the more you iterate, the more cycles you can get through. You can start making improvements. You can start doing experiments to start finding out what works and doesn't work. Cycle time is very important to the whole recipe in general. And I think that Morris Dang correctly identified it was the weakness of what was then the Japanese giant, the Japanese semiconductor industry, which was the giant of the world at that time. And they recognized that the Japanese weakness is cycle time. And, cycle time, their cycle times were months on end at a time where, like, if you cut that down substantially, you can get a product out really fast, which is good for the customers. At the same time, you can drive down yields aggressively in a way that makes customers even happier. So it's like it was a double win. And the Japanese, for whatever reason, were never that great at bringing down cycle times. And I think cycle time was TSMC's key to kind of becoming good, in addition to their pledge never to compete against their customers.
So this is another sort of, in my limited view and opinion, key to success of the Taiwanese semiconductor industry. It's not just, superior technology or processes that are secret and no one knows about them. It's just straight up improving productivity of your equipment and the yields that you can. It's efficiency, basically. It boils down to that.
It's like striking a balance in between. If the Japanese were said to be a little too wedded to their machine, a little too wedded to the recipe, and if the Americans were kind of the opposite, where they kind of made changes everywhere, right? Then I think like Taiwanese struck that middle where you need to be fast, but you need to be practical. So I think that was kind of like a very special place that I think that the industry exploited.
Another thing that I learned from your video when I revisited it recently was the sticker system, the emoji system TSMC used in their fabs to sort of mark the status of the machine. Can you explain how that worked?
It's really fascinating because like at that time, there was really no idea if the machine was working or not. And the Taiwanese were not very well trained, and you had to, obviously they went to school and everything, but like they kind of do our own thing. So what they did is that they would walk through and they would have 4 different types of stickers and they would stick it on the machine. Like it's a happy face if it's going and everything's good, and then there's a sad face if it's down or something like that. And then there's like, that's kind of like a simple system to, like, it's not computerized or anything, but it can tell you that's like, okay, you need to be fixing this machine right now. I think Morris was very clear. One thing that he brought over from TI was that the line never stops. The line must always keep going. And I think that's kind of like a early manifestation of that sort of culture, which is very special within the company that I think that like other people don't really have.
You also recently made a video on ASML in which you actually recommend Mark Hying's recent book, The ASML Way. We actually had him on as a guest on our show. Really fun person to talk about and very knowledgeable about ASML. But you got an opportunity to visit ASML in the Netherlands.
Right.
You mentioned in the video that the two companies, TSMC and ASML, kind of grew together because both of them, ASML was spun off from Philips. They kind of were under, one umbrella up to a certain point. Do you think that relationship between them will continue based on kind of what you know about both companies? Because, I mean, right now TSMC buys like 80% of ASML products, right?
It's a very interesting relationship between them. And I think like I've always asserted that like their cultural styles kind of mesh well, right? The Taiwanese are very much, TSMC people will very much tell ASML everything that they do not like about the device. And then the ASML people will be like, calm down, or they'll yell back to say like, you're not using it right or something like that. And then it's a very give and take sort of, it's a very combative, constructive criticism. And I think that sort of contributes to the two success, because you have one customer who's like, we're using it, trying to get everything they can out of the machine. It's like F1, Formula One. You have the driver, and then you have the people making the car. And I think like they fight. And I think that's part of what makes the success so valuable. I am not quite sure what the corporate siblinghoodness, the Philipsness of it kind of contributes to this day. I think like there's a lot of back and forth, obviously, and TSMC never likes a single supplier, which ASML is. But I think even if a second supplier were to emerge in the lithography space, ASML would not go away. So I think like that's a very key point. I think they will continue to work together very closely, if not aggressively together.
Well, what you said about the cultures, I have to admit, I initially found it a little counterintuitive. Because you mentioned in your video that if you work at ASML, you have to be ready to have your ideas and opinions challenged by your peers, by your colleagues. That doesn't really seem in line with the overall work culture here in Taiwan, where it's in many companies, the traditional industries, it's very top down, very kind of hierarchical, and feedback is not always very forthcoming, from colleagues and peers. Is TSMC actually doing something differently, or is that just like good synergy between like how TSMC works slightly differently and ASML with this kind of more sort of peer-to-peer attitude?
It's a kind of very interesting sort of way to kind of understand what that culture is within TSMC. I go back and forth on this. Sometimes I think they are a Taiwanese company. Like they have this sort of Taiwanese attitude where it's like, if there's this new thing, it's like, oh, 太麻烦, 不要做. Right? But then there's
too much of a hassle.
Yeah, too much of a hassle. But, they also have the sort of very aggressive non-Taiwanese status of like they always want to push. They always push, and they're always trying to get better. And I think they never settle. It's a unique culture that must have been developed over the years. And I think in what is similar with ASML is that they value ideas, and they value the superiority of the idea over who is kind of bringing it up. So within their R&D teams, there is something that I hear a lot is that there is no star, right? So like, for example, there is no like star scientist whose ideas are always like respected every time, right? They don't have notions of fancy where they take a new technology and they kind of hold it up and they say, well, we are going to be the one to kind of break this. We're the first to this technology, right? What they do is they listen to their customers. They listen to how to achieve something achieve their customers' goals using whatever technology they can. And then whatever the best idea is will emerge and be chosen. That's their goal. And I think that's kind of in what way it's similar with ASML, because ASML is like, they're also very idea driven as well.
Well, you say there are no stars at TSMC, but TSMC employees themselves are a bit of superstars in Taiwan. I'm sure 95% of parents in Taiwan would want their child to work for TSMC and earn those wages. Do you think, because TSMC's initial advantage was relatively low wages, which meant that you could put like 2 engineers to solve one problem instead of 1, because you could afford to do that. Right now, TSMC engineers are famously fantastically well paid. Do you think that might be a danger to TSMC when in a situation where we see other competitors, that we have China, we have Southeast Asian countries, we have India that are throwing their hats into the ring, trying to compete in the semiconductor space Do you feel that the sort of growing wages only in the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, because let's be clear, they are not growing across the board here. Is that a risk to TSMC?
I think it is. And I think but it's not just the only risk. I think you need to kind of pull back and think of one of the TSMC's bigger concerns is how are they going to preserve the human capital that they have within their ranks, right? Because as it becomes clear is that it's not that easy to train a semiconductor engineer.
Right.
And I think something that I've kind of learned that surprised me is that a good semiconductor R&D engineer needs 5 years of apprenticeship, maybe 10 years to be really good.
Wow.
And they really only study just one thing. They'll study the etch machine for 5 years, and they'll know the whole thing in and out. So they'll know everything about it. And I think that's kind of antithetical to a lot of more modern practices, especially in the software industry in Silicon Valley, where you jump every 2 years, maybe less, right? You do work for 1 year, jump for a higher salary next year and all that. And I think TSMC recognizes that cultural attitudes are changing and people are more apt to jump from one place to another. And I think the talents that they're developing are valuable, right? Not a trade secret kind of way, but just these are valuable people that you've kind of taught a lot. And I think they've been changing over the past couple of years to kind of try to adapt to that while retaining the things that still make them successful. And it's a tough balance, a tough tightrope that they have to walk. If you see what's going on in Arizona, it's definitely a challenge.
Well, so what kind of things have they been doing? How have they been changing in the last couple of years?
The one that I think that makes me laugh, here's a funny one. It's they have this sort of policy now where they say the speak gently policy, where it's you do not manage by yelling. I think there's still a lot of people who manage.
It's interesting that they had to put that rule in place.
Yeah.
There was a lot of yelling before.
Speak gently.
Yeah.
It's a very high stress industry, and I think it's an organization motivated by yelling. But they've been, right now they have this new phrase. It's speak gently. It's so interesting that certain things that they'll say in Taiwan will never fly in the United States. If they did this in the United States, there'd be workplace problems all over the place. I wouldn't necessarily say lawsuits, but there's gonna be people gonna be I got to get out of here. But in Taiwan, where maybe necessarily you haven't been raised by the most kindest, heartwarming parents, and maybe you're a little used to a little bit of a cold way of parenting. I certainly felt I was it kind of fits between.
This is oddly familiar.
Oddly familiar, yes.
Coming from Poland, I can totally relate. It's interesting that they kind of find themselves in this conundrum where you have to compensate people well to keep them there, but on the other hand, that brings the cost up and causes all kinds of
human costs in terms of semiconductor manufacturing is a very small percentage of the overall product. In the end, what is the major thing is the capital expensed, as well as the yields and making sure that you can get the yields up to acceptable level. In the end, I would say that you're probably penny pinching in terms of engineer pay. They could probably afford a little more, but a lot of it is kind of up to the particular talent itself.
And I know a lot of TSMC engineers also retire young. A, because they can afford to, and B, because they burn out. It's almost a meme that you work at TSMC until you're in your late 40s, maybe early 50s, and then you move to Taidong to open a cafe, which is an interesting sort of life cycle of a almost it reminds me of the army, where if you're an officer, you can retire at 45 or 50, and then enjoy the rest of your years after a very intense but short career.
It reminds me of investment banking in the United States.
Also,
you get paid a lot, and then you work really, really hard, but most of them end up burnt out at 45 somewhere, starting a cafe.
Speaking of capital investments and kind of getting the big expensive toys, you actually saw one of those at ASML, the Beast, as you called it,
the
high NA EUV machine. But you said that TSMC wasn't super keen on moving into that technology because of the price tag. Do you have a ballpark estimate of how much that kind of machine might cost? Are we talking billions of dollars, or are we still in the millions territory?
Still in the hundreds of millions.
Okay.
It's a very interesting dynamic right now, and I think it's kind of the center point of what they're doing, of the relationship between TSMC and ASML right now, is that ASML has this new machine. And it's not just the cost, right? It's like $400 million. It's a massive machine. It's a school bus, essentially. Like imagine you have to rejigger your whole your fab around this school bus thing. So there's all these ancillary costs, which is for the fab that they have to absorb not in addition to paying this $400 million or whatever the cost is. They say it's not, but everyone says it is. So like I'm reckoning that you have this machine, and then like you have these other things that you have to deal with, right? For example, there are technical limitations with the machine that they cut the field in half, right? So the field is like the amount of space that you can print onto the wafer. They cut that in half because of limitations with the photomask, which is the mirror that contains the chip design. So
Right.
The Japanese or whoever makes the photomask were like, we're not changing this. So they had to do some special optics stuff to make it that you cut the field size in half. So it's like that means you get less productivity. So not only does this machine cost more, it's less productive. And I think like a lot of the mechatronics and whatever that the high-NA EUV machine has in sort of benefit already is flowing into the low-NA EUV machine. And the funny thing is that ASML's greatest foe in terms of its competitor is itself. It's its own lower-class EUV machines. And TSMC has basically done the math, and they said, we think we can double patent these machines, these low-NA EUV machines, and we'll still come out ahead rather than high-NA EUV. And I think like ASML is basically, I mean, they don't like hearing that, obviously, but the TSMC has said it publicly several times. There's also other technical limitations, right? Because when you raise ANA, you lower what is called the depth of field, which is the length or the area by which the chip design image, the projected chip design image is in focus, which means when you shrink that by some percentage, you basically tell TSMC you have that little less margin to actually kind of get a good image onto your wafer. So they've looked at all this and they said, look, this is a very compromised machine. And I think like they were comfortable, and they are still comfortable with letting someone else go start with it and do the hard work of making it work. And in this case, with the first EUV, it was Samsung. And the second now with this is Intel. Intel's bought 3 or 4 of these machines. And like they're trying to get this thing working. Everyone at TSMC acknowledges that at some point, maybe 10A or something, A10 or whatever, they'll eventually start using this thing. But like they're going to try to push it off as far away as they can because it's expensive and it's a big commitment. And I think like there are the ways that exist to get it to work economically require really big, risky moves. And that's not what TSMC likes to do.
Well, it's interesting because like a few short years before TSMC got started was kind of inconceivable to most companies in the space. What do you mean go fabless? What do you mean like just having a dedicated manufacturer who doesn't design and doesn't compete with its own customers?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that they're now kind of like letting someone else take the lead and take the risk.
It's funny, right? Because it's like early on, that was one of the benefits of having the American executives come in to help run TSMC in those early days.
Which is something that not a lot of people also realize because, again, this is like, it's Taiwanese. They learned how to make those chips. And now, especially if you listen to some segments of American political spectrum, it's like they stole our, chip industry. But it was all American CEOs. Like I think the first 3 were Americans. So the first decade of TSMC under direct American management.
It's kind of funny because it's like you had a lot of these top executives from Semiconductor were basically put out to pasture in the United States. Morris Chang himself was put out to pasture. They were all people whose career has sort of kind of gone nowhere, and then they decided let's go back and let's go somewhere else and try to see what happens. And I think like TSMC would not be where it is if it didn't have American leadership for the first 10 or so years of its existence. And I think a lot of people have said it, and I would say it myself. Even if you look at the top executives in TSMC right now, almost all of them, with a few exceptions, are educated in America. All of them educated in IBM, Intel. They just came back to go work at TSMC for a little bit. And then, so it's like, they were running it. So like, I don't know. It's very funny.
I do want to kind of take a look towards the future a little bit. Well, AI is the hot button topic,
Yes.
But a lot of people are starting to think of it as a bubble, as something that will eventually, if not burst, then at least deflate.
Yes.
What's your take on that? Where is AI headed?
You know, it's kind of interesting because you have different groups of people thinking different things. So it's kind of like they're all looking at the elephant from different perspectives. I think, outside of Silicon Valley, right, you have people saying this is obviously a massive bubble. This is not going to end well. None of these products make enough money to justify whatever trillions of dollars to spend that you're going to do. Inside Silicon Valley, outside of San Francisco, you're going to have a lot of people who are saying, well, you know, we're just going to ride this. There's very big technical problems that we can solve. Let's focus on solving those problems. And let's just try to kind of get these products working the way they can and let the software engineers try to figure out how to do this. Inside San Francisco, there is a very small group of believers within a very small part of the San Francisco neighborhood, which are basically saying, we are building the AI god. And why hasn't TSMC delivered enough chips
to power our
god? If it wasn't for TSMC, we would have had AGI last year. That's basically, I joke kind of, but it's not actually a joke. There is pressure on TSMC from a lot of big people in Silicon Valley who basically are saying the reason why these data centers are not up. Yes, there's a lot of reasons, but like the big one is TSMC. TSMC has not believed, capital B, right? And I think when I came back from the United States, from Europe, and the people in Europe are basically saying, this is crazy. Like, what is going on? It's like, this is all going to end very badly. I think there's a lot of very loud people in Silicon Valley who are saying, look, our AI revolution is not happening fast enough. We can't get AI good enough. And unless TSMC speeds up, we're going to stall out. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic where you have one group of people screaming that this is a huge financial bubble. You have one group of people saying, yes, it's a bubble, but we need to keep going. And there's another group of people saying, it's like, how are we going to build these data centers? They don't even care about the revenue right now. They're true believers. It's wild.
Well, but despite all of that, you remain a technological optimist. Is that right? In one of your videos, you say, and I quote, "We need to have more technological optimism in our lives." What did you mean by that?
I think there's a lot of negativity in this world, especially I would say in the last, maybe 10 years, where people basically stopped believing in the ability of technology to make people kind of improve people's lives. And I think one of the big parts of working on the videos have been telling people, like, look, like life is not the same as it was in the 1950s, like, or even the 70s or 80s, or even the 1990s or 2010s.
Yeah, 2010s. Yeah, completely different world.
Completely different world. A lot of things have changed. And I think maybe that's in part because people conflate technology with like maybe negative social things or something like that. But I think what I want to help people understand is that technology when used right, is a good contributor to helping people live better lives, live healthier, and kind of improve their overall well-being. And like, I of course see, all these stories of people using technology for bad and for wrong purposes and irritating purposes. And like, I'm like, oh my gosh. But like, I try to stay at least optimistic that problems can be worked out, problems can be solved, and people can help themselves using technology. And that's what I mean by being optimist.
So is there nothing that raises even a small alarm bell in your head when it comes to technology? I don't know, superintelligence, singularity, any of those? I know they're far into the future still, but...
I mean, this is a very loaded question. I have friends who listen and they're going to be like, John, you don't believe in AGI, ASI? I
believe
generally,
again, capital B.
Yeah. I'm going to say that, like, I don't think AI, as LLMs as they are right now, understand the world through actual experience. Yeah. And I think they need to do that in order to become super intelligent, so to say, right? And right now they don't. We intermediate their access to the world either through words or images or something like that. They can't sense the world themselves. And right now, items like robotics and stuff like that don't quite exactly give that feeling yet. And I think it's a long way away. And I generally see that technology is a neutral force. It's a neutral force. It's an embodiment of physics and physics and natural laws. And I think like we use it humans use it to find it for a purpose and hopefully to find purpose as well.
Are you going to get a humanoid robot when they become commercially available?
I do not think they will work.
You don't? Why? Well, in a recent video, because I did make a note of that, you said you were starting to rethink your stance that China will take the lead in humanoid robotics after your last visit to the US.
Yes. I don't think that's necessarily because America is going to get really good at humanoid robotics necessarily. I think that there's probably just one use case for them, which is like in the home.
Yeah, a butler, I guess.
Yeah, there's like a social acceptance angle of it where like you can accept that there's a robot in your home. But like a robot would not be useful in the factory, in the industry, outside. Mostly doesn't have enough strength, right? Robots right now, humanoid reform robots don't have enough dexterity and strength, for example, to pick up this chair or this table. And that's a fundamental electronic motor thing. And I think like right now we have great robots that do amazing work. I mean, there's drones, arms, rovers. Like those three winning categories. Why build humanoid robots unless the humanoid part is essential to their success, which is only really one thing.
Well, unfortunate for all the sci-fi enthusiasts among our viewers and listeners, but maybe for the best. Final question. Once you develop a following such as yours, you're coming up on 900,000 subscribers. Congratulations, by the way. I'm sure you start thinking about like the kind of message that, you know, the feelings, the ideas that you want to leave with your viewers, kind of the change that you want to affect in the world. Besides sort of increasing optimism about technology, have you thought about the kind of changes in attitudes or thinking that you want to make happen in the heads of your viewers?
When I was at Semicon West, there was something really special about meeting people who tell me, John, I'm working in semiconductors because of you.
Wow.
Like I heard of semiconductors because of you. I watched your videos and I decided now I work at a test company or something like that, or ASML or TSMC. And I think that's kind of like a really special feeling for me. Well, it also makes me feel really old because I've been doing this for a while, but like it makes me feel good because I know someone's life is kind of affected, hopefully for the better, because of work I've done. And it keeps me going because otherwise it's a very lonely job,
right?
Working in content by yourself. And so whenever people show up, it makes it worth it.
Well, hopefully you will have a lot more positive impact on a lot more people as your channel continues to grow. Thank you very much for giving us your time and coming over here to have a chat about technology and history with me.
It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you
very much. And to our viewers, what was your relationship with technology when you were growing up, and how does that influence how you think about technology today? Let us know in the comments below. While you're there, also check out our main show, Connected on TaiwanPlus, which you can find on YouTube and the TaiwanPlus website. I'm Tomasz Koper, and I'll talk to you next time.